From Gotham City, it's the BatPodcast. I'm Pat the Batman fan. Welcome back to the show. If you've ever seen a Batman cartoon or animated film, odds are you've seen my guest today's name. She has been doing voice casting and voice directing since 1984 and made an indelible mark on the Batman universe with the Batman animated series and has pretty much done every Batman project since then. You may have heard some of my previous guests talking about her in positively glowing terms, and everybody who works with her absolutely adores her. She's also the subject of a schoolboy crush by yours truly, which you may have heard me mention on previous episodes. And today you're going to find out why. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the lovely and talented Andrea Romano.
Release the bats!
So I was lucky enough to finally meet you at the event that you and the amazing voiceover legend Rob Paulsen put on for another legend, Mr. Gordon Hunt. Before we go too far into the interview, I wonder if you could let my listeners know a little bit about Gordon.
Oh, it would be my pleasure. It was very nice to meet you there as well.
Oh, thank you.
Gordon Hunt was the on-staff voice director at Hanna-Barbera. Boy, I'm not even sure what year he started there. I'm guessing early 80s. I started there as a casting director in 84 and was his casting director through almost 1990. So I did about 5.5 years at Hanna-Barbera with Gordon, and he was my mentor and also mentor to many, many of us voice directors. Jenny McSwain, Chris Zimmerman, many of us worked with Gordon initially, and he has such talent and such skill and such humanity and such patience that he is so well loved by the acting community at large. He was the casting director at the Mark Taper Forum for many years too, so he knows a tremendous number of actors. He's been a private coach and an acting teacher as well as all of his animation work. And he's just one of those incredibly good, kind, talented people that you're lucky to know. And I was lucky enough to be, I joked that night about being shoulder to shoulder with him for 5.5 years because the recording booth that we had at Hanna-Barbera was really quite small, and we were literally shoulder to shoulder for 5.5 years. Gordon was the first on-staff voice director, as far as I know, for animation anywhere. And he set the tone for so many of us, and because of his connection with Joe Barbera, and Joe Barbera being a big fan of theater, and Gordon being a casting director in theater, that was where it all began for them. And then Gordon went on to direct so many shows like The Smurfs and The Snorks, and we made The Jetsons, and it happened to be those years when we were making a lot of So-and-so and Son. So it was Popeye and Son, The Pink Panther and Son. A lot of the, sort of, The Muppet Babies was the show that sort of started that trend. That was not a Hanna-Barbera show, but it started that trend. And so Gordon and I were there for, a lot of what I call the factory years, which was we were recording so many episodes of so many cartoons every week, minimum 10 episodes a week of various different cartoons. And it was the best training ground for me possibly because of the sheer amount of work and the number of actors I got to meet, but also because Gordon was very kind in really kind of showing me the ropes, and there was nothing better than learning by example. I mean, truly, if you just behave the way Gordon Hunt behaves, then you're golden. You're set for life. He's an honorable, talented, good man, and people want to do a good job for him. And in all ways, the casting directors, the people that work with him, the actors that work with him, everybody wants to do a good job for Gordon.
Wow. Well, having only sort of been dimly aware of who he was before I went to this event, it was pretty mind-blowing seeing all of his body of work and all the people whose lives he touched and all the people he influenced. And I think you guys did just a fantastic job honoring him that night.
Very kind of you to say so. I was something I had in my mind, some sort of way of honoring this man for several years. This was kind of one of those moments where everything in the universe aligned, and it was a wonderful evening when his daughter, Helen Hunt, the Academy Award-winning Helen Hunt, was able to be there, and she was very touched by the event. Gordon's wife, the remarkably talented B.J. Ward, was there. So many actors who, you know, if you don't know them by name or by sight, you certainly know their voices on having heard them for years and years and years in cartoons. Unfortunately, many were not able to be there. June Foray couldn't be there. Janet Waldo, the voice of Judy Jetson, couldn't be there. A lot of these older actors who I really wanted, but they just were not able to make it. But it was a lovely event, and it was nice that you were able to be there.
Oh, well, I was honored to be there. I was watching history, and it was also great because I was finally able to meet you and confess my schoolboy crush on you. So, so now we can move beyond that and talk more just about you. That'll be fun. Exactly. Sometimes you're listed as a casting director, and sometimes you're listed as a voice director. Is there a difference between those two, or is it just semantics?
No, they're extremely different, and I'm so very glad that you asked the question, because if I can take a minute to explain this, I think it will explain things to a lot of our fans of animation. A casting director's job is to supply for the various powers that be, and those powers that be may be studio executives, they may be creators of a project, they may be producers, writers, animation directors. The casting director's job is to supply to those people auditions and or submissions by name of people who would be appropriate for various roles. Now, casting directors may very well direct the auditions, but for the title casting director, they do not voice direct the actual cartoon. Voice directors direct the actual performance of the actors for the cartoon itself. Now, there's a lot of overlap. There may be an instance where, say, for example, callback auditions, where the voice director wants to audition the callback to make sure they can get the performance that they need if, in fact, they do hire that actor. So you may have an instance on a project where the casting director does the initial submissions and the initial auditions, and then the voice director comes in, directs the callbacks. As a group, the various people who have say decide who they want to cast on the project, and then the voice director directs the episode, the special, the direct-to-home video, all of that. Now, kind of special unto animation itself, many of us cast and direct, and I certainly do that. And the reason I do it is I like to know that that whoever I cast, I know I'm going to get a certain performance out of them because I've either worked with them before, I've auditioned them, I've chatted with their agent, I know the actor because I've taught them in a class, whatever. But it's unusual. Almost never do you see in on-camera work somebody credited as both the casting director and the director. It's kind of special unto animation where a lot of us cast and direct. So you'll see a lot of my credits will say casting and voice director. They are two separate jobs, but they can both be done by one person. Does that help clarify that?
Absolutely. That was a great answer. Now, you do so many projects, and it seems like constantly, for so many years. How do you keep track of it all in your head? I mean, you must just be...
I find, Pat, sometimes, it sounds like a joke, but I'm absolutely not kidding when I say that I find myself in my car, driving in the morning, and trying to remember, midway in the middle of the 101, going, oh no, where am I going? I don't remember what session I'm supposed to go to. Am I going to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Oh no, I'm going to Turbo. No, wait, I'm going. I mean, I literally am never doing less than 5 projects at a time. Never less than 5. Sometimes as many as 11 at a single time, which really is
wow.
just great.
My gosh.
A lot of work. And keeping it straight is a challenge and is getting more and more difficult as I'm getting older.
Right.
But I love my work so much that as long as I can keep it straight, I trust that I've got another good 10 years
Well, obviously you couldn't do something like that without loving it, but it's almost like you were born to do this job.
When I was 10 years old, as many young girls will do, I kind of was dreaming what my adult life would be like, and I knew that I wanted to somehow be involved in the entertainment industry. I did not know exactly how, whether it was as a performer or as a director, or I did not really know that I would be working in animation. However, there was no bigger cartoon fan than myself. I just love cartoons. I've loved them since the first time I ever saw one. So when I was 10 years old, I dreamt of my life as an adult, and I knew I'd somehow, or I wanted somehow to be involved in the entertainment industry. And I wanted to be married to someone from another country who spoke with a foreign accent and who was an artist. And I am celebrating this year my 23rd year with my husband, Rogério Nogueira, who's a Brazilian artist, who does still speak with a beautiful Brazilian accent. And so what I'm here to tell you is sometimes wishes do come true.
That's right.
And here I ended up with this beautiful career, which I truly love. The truth is, Pat, the prep work to get a cartoon ready to record is grueling. It's exhausting. It's exacting. There's a lot of people to please. There's a lot of paperwork and actual prep on paper and deals to be negotiated and schedules to be worked out. But once I am in a recording session, actually directing actors, I could walk into that session sick as a dog, feeling horrible, depressed, tired. The second I begin that session, it all goes away and I am 100%, I am happy, I'm filled with joy. I finish the session, maybe 15 minutes to come down from the session, and then I remember, oh yeah, I'm not feeling 100%. So that's a pretty good indicator of how much I love my work.
Yeah, as I said, I sort of grew aware of you, or became aware of you over the years after seeing your name in credits for various projects and stuff. And then I really became more aware of you when I started watching like the behind the scenes of the DVDs of the various DC animated movies and things like that. And that's when I developed my crush on you. because and it's because I was trying to just now picture you depressed, and it was kind of hard because every time, I think that's what sort of made me sort of warm to you, was because you just seem like you just are so happy and have such a wonderful glow about you. I mean, you clearly love what you're doing, and it's infectious. And the other voice actors that I've spoken to, Adrienne Barbeau, Bruce Thomas, they're all like, they totally understand my crush on you, because they are just like, she is the most wonderful person. She's always up. She always, so, yeah.
I do have a very even temperament. It takes a lot to make me unhappy. I'm almost always happy. That's kind of the way I start my day. I start my day happy, and certainly, like anybody, especially living in Los Angeles, you have things that act upon you that can affect your mood or whatever, but for the most part, I am so lucky to have found a career that I love so much, to be accepted into this industry so lovingly, and to have kind of amazingly to me made a place for myself in it, where people do affiliate my name with animation for the last 20 years, which is just still astounding to me. And to have people actually recognize me, and as you say, because of the DVD extras, people actually know what I look like now, and because of the internet and podcasts and things like that. But I still maintain quite a bit of anonymity, and I like that too. But I'm astounded that people will come up to me at a Comic-Con and they'll be nervous and they'll wish to introduce themselves to me, and I'm so grateful that they even want to meet me, because I like knowing the fans, and I like knowing that they appreciate the hard work that we put into making productions for them.
Well, you've earned any accolades that you come your way. I mean, for sure. You've been doing this for quite a long time, and through the years, you've been through several iterations of Batman, starting with the wonderful, and I'm going to mispronounce his name, but Ulan Soul.
It's so weird that you say this. Ulan Soule. My very first day on the job, at Hanna-Barbera. It was a Monday. And I'm so happy to be there, and I've got setting up my little office, and Gordon comes into my office and he says, "Oh, Andrea, on Monday afternoons I teach a class down the street, and so we have an actor booked today at 2 o'clock. He's got about 4 or 5 lines of dialogue that need to be picked up. His name is Olin Soule. He plays Batman for us. So just pick up those lines of dialogue, and we'll add them into the show later." And I remember thinking, oh my Lord, I've never directed a cartoon before, and I barely know how to slate. Fortunately, I had gone to a couple of sessions that Gordon directed, so I had seen kind of what needed to be done, but literally, my very first directing work at Hanna-Barbera was directing Olin Soule for 5 or 6 lines of dialogue. Oddly enough, that was one of my very, very first gigs that I ever did, and I listened back to some of those shows, and I'm delighted they were as successful as they were, and I know that they loom large in a lot of people's memories of their first remembrances of the superheroes, but boy, compared to what we do now, it's certainly come a long way, huh?
Right, all of the superhero characters, but Batman in particular, did that amaze you to see the level? I guess it probably would have started with the animated series, although Bruce Timm and those guys really upped the game, I think, with Tiny Toons too, you know, kind of bringing an adult level to it.
Absolutely. Well, the truth of it is, clearly, Batman is a dark character. It's called The Dark Knight. It's a very dark character. A lot of people's first exposure to Batman, those who didn't really read comic books, their first exposure to Batman was the Adam West 1960s live-action series. And that was a very, very comic, as in humor, turn on the Batman world. So lots of people took offense, major comic book fans took huge offense at that particular depiction of Batman because this is a very dark story, they say. If you think about what America was like at the time, it was the right series for that time. I don't think America would have tolerated a truly, truly dark Batman. We say something like Under the Red Hood. They would not have been able to take an animated version of that back in the 1960s. The series, the comics, the world has gotten darker and more sophisticated in its entertainment. And so I certainly have watched the shows that I've worked on, especially the Batman shows, but also the Justice League projects and the various other ones, become darker and more gritty and more graphic. And it seems a relatively natural progression. It kind of parallels the society at the time. And, my husband, it's really interesting. My husband, having grown up in Brazil, there was a lot of our television shows that he did not get to see. And only just now, because of the various hundreds of networks and options we have for watching various content, is starting to watch shows like Donna Reed or Leave It to Beaver or those kinds of shows that never got dubbed or sent over to Brazil. And so you think about coming out of that time and trying to put some kind of very dark Batman in there, it just wasn't the right time for it. It had to evolve with all of us. And I even think about my own, say, for example, television viewing. If you had told me even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that I would enjoy watching shows, procedural shows like CSI or Criminal Minds, and not be completely grossed out or nauseated or, frightened, to death, I wouldn't have believed it. And it's not to say that I've gotten colder or harder. It's just that when you're more and more exposed to that kind of thing, it becomes more palatable. And so I think that the evolution of Batman has been very natural and gone along with where society is. Certainly, a lot of these graphic novels and comic books that were written, that we based a lot of our animated materials on, were really dark and grim. It's just that to read that on the page and kind of let your imagination go into those pictures is one thing. To have it acted for you on screen by voice actors and by animation directors who are making those characters act, that's a different energy, that's a different story, and I think it's kind of come along as it's meant to. Whether or not there will be, there's always I watch as much different kinds of animation Nick Jr. to see what kind of things they're showing little kids. But as an adult woman, I enjoy watching some of the darkest Batman stuff that we make, and I also like watching Bubble Guppies. Something really light and sweet. I love to see the different kinds of animation. So I think there's room for everything. I think even now there's room for a light. Well, it wasn't that many years ago that we did Brave and the Bold, and that was a very light turn on Batman.
Right.
So I think time and a place for all of it.
That's very, very true. I tend to think of the Batman universe as a lot of, people say, well, what's your favorite Batman, this, that. It's like, well, it's all a rich tapestry, there's room, as you say, and that's what's great about the character. You can interpret him so many different ways, and none of it's necessarily wrong or right.
That's right. It's whatever you like. There are so many versions that you probably can find one that you like. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's not like, I don't like Batman because he's always this way. Well, if you don't like the dark Batman, did you ever watch the Adam West live-action series? Did you ever watch The Brave and the Bold? It's that question that you often get asked, who's your favorite superhero?
Right.
I would venture to say that most people say Batman. My guess is that, on the average, most people like Batman because he is so varied, as opposed to Superman, who, unless he's being acted upon by kryptonite or there is some other force acting upon him, Superman is pretty much always going to behave in the same manner. He's always going to be the Boy Scout. He's always going to do the right thing. Batman has a clearly dark side, and because he's human, he could screw up. And that's what I think that makes for dramatic tension. That's when you see, in something like Dark Knight Returns, where you see a Bruce Wayne who drinks far too much, who's lost his faith in the city, lost his faith in Batman.
Right.
And then you get so many different permeations of so many other stories, and I love it. As you said, it is a rich tapestry.
It must be incredibly difficult to cast somebody as Batman in the first place. Since Kevin Conroy, has it become more difficult because he's sort of thought of as the definitive performance?
The hardest casting job I ever have to tackle, casting Batman again and again and again. And probably, it could be almost 10 years ago now, someone at Comic-Con, one of my fans at Comic-Con, told me that at that point, 10 years ago, I had already cast Batman over 12 times for various different projects. Wow. And by now it's at least 17 to 20 times I've had to cast Batman. It was daunting and difficult the first time, and it gets more and more difficult as I go along, because truthfully, anytime I read a script that has Batman in it, it is in fact Kevin's voice that I hear in my head doing the lines of dialogue. I can't help it. He was my first. It's like having your first boyfriend,
Right.
He was my first Batman, and I'll tell you, casting that first series, Batman the Animated Series, was very, very difficult. I think I heard over 500 auditions.
Wow.
I called back over 150 actors, and we narrowed it down to about 5 or 6 people, Bruce, Tim, and I did. And then I did one last-ditch search in town and talked to a bunch of my favorite on-camera casting friends and said, do you have any actors that you know of that are really good, solid actors with strong, good voices that you think would be appropriate for Batman? And my dear friend Anthony Barneo mentioned this wonderful Broadway TV actor, Kevin Conroy, and we brought him in, and I've told the story many times. Bruce, Tim, and I looked at each other in the callback and just went, oh my Lord, we're done. We found it. We had like 5 actors that they could do it, yeah, they could do it, yes. But this was a eureka moment. It was just so brilliant. And then every time since, it's been more and more difficult because the fans, in fact, are always comparing whoever I cast to Kevin Conroy. And that's not, I understand that. I'm not confused by that. My job as a casting director is, as I said before, to present options that are appropriate. The first question I always ask when I'm offered a job to cast and direct Batman is, can I use Kevin Conroy? That's the first thing I say. Can Kevin be Batman? And sometimes they say yes, and sometimes they say no. And their reasons are all over the place. We're going to use completely different artwork. We want to create a completely for this. We want it to be a very young Batman, where he's only just first learning, how to be Batman. And Kevin's voice is a little too mature for that now. And all kinds of different reasons, all valid reasons. And of course, I have the option to say, I don't want to do it, or sure, I'll take on this challenge. But I'll tell you, we've got a project coming up that I can't discuss yet because it's not announced. But I often do go back to certain actors that I have offered the role to before who had said no to me simply because they weren't available. And because I knew they would be very, very good Batmen under certain circumstances with certain pieces. I did go back and finally get an actor that I've been after for years and years and years, and finally he was available. Our schedules lined up, and he's going to be in a movie for us probably about a year from now. His movie will come out. So, but still, difficult work.
The fan said there was, how many? 12 back 10 years ago?
10 years ago, there was 12 of them. And we're talking all the way back from Hanna-Barbera days, because I was casting back then.
Right.
Through Batman the Animated Series. He showed up in Justice League. He showed up in some episodes of Justice League where there was like a secondary Batman for whatever story.
Right.
There was Batman Beyond. There was Batman who showed up in the Superman series.
Right.
There was... So we made 23 different direct-to-home video projects that are either Batman, Superman, or Justice League projects. Sometimes Wonder Woman and Green Lantern, but often Batman makes a cameo guest appearance. So, it's the numbers got to be at least 17 to 20 that I cast Batman. There's, Brave and the Bold, Peter Bader, perfect for that role.
He was great.
Terry McGinnis, very young, a high school student. And what was so lovely about that project was we used Will Friedle as Terry McGinnis and the young Batman, but we were able to use Kevin Conroy as the 80-year-old Bruce Wayne. So we were able to still keep Kevin on the project, even though he wasn't playing Batman per se.
Speaking of Batman Beyond, that's one of my favorite versions because it's true to the original Batman, but yet it expanded. I thought it was very, very smartly done, and I didn't discover it until a few years after it had gone off the air, and I was able to watch the DVDs, and I think that's the case with a lot of people. I think they're more and more discovering it now. Do you find more fans of it nowadays?
Absolutely. People are coming up and just saying, wow, I just watched this new series. I said, well, it's not really a new series, but it's new to you, and that's great. But yeah, it holds up pretty well. It's a very interesting, I think Bruce did a beautiful job. Bruce Timm did a beautiful job with that series. It was, we were trying to get out from under the mantle, if you will, the cape and cowl of the existing Batman the Animated Series, and we were all very proud of our work on that series. I'm not saying anything negative about it, but you don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. You have to do something to keep things fresh for yourself, and so this was a very nice way of bringing in different villains, having a younger Terry McGinnis slash Batman. I'm so very happy that series happened. I got to meet and become very dear friends with Will Friedle. And we got to work with Terry Garr, who I was so delighted to work with.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful people came in to do guest villains and guest roles on that. That was just really a lovely series.
Henry Rollins was one of my favorites on there, Mad Stan.
Of that. I still work with Henry on The Legend of Korra for Nickelodeon. And he's a terrific guy, and that was the first time I hired him. But he's actually very versatile, so learned. The man is incredibly educated, very well read, and while he certainly can play, some guy ranting at the establishment, he can also do a lot more subtle work than that, and I was so very grateful when he said yes to come and play this for the first time, and still continues to do so some 20 years later.
That's awesome. Now, a lot of people may not know that Tim Curry was originally cast as the Joker in the animated series. What led to him not eventually getting the role?
I love Tim Curry, adore Tim Curry. I gave Tim Curry his first voiceover job in the United States back at Hanna-Barbera in something like 1986 or something. And the same with Mark Hamill. I gave Mark his first voiceover gig, and it wasn't as the Joker on Batman the Animated Series, and he had reached out to me, Mark Hamill had reached out to me through his agent, because he was such a Batman fan and had such a collection of comics and really followed it. When he found out we were making this series, he reached out to me and said, please, I want to be a part of the show. So I brought him in as guest star. He was fantastic, and after the session, he replied and said, "Thank you so much, this was great, but what I'm really trying to tell you is I want to be a part of this show, not just come in and do one episode. I want to be a part of the show." So what happened, and the truth of it is, while I think Mark Hamill is a crazy good Joker, and I'm delighted that he ultimately became the Joker for so many people, I personally would never have replaced Tim Curry. I thought Tim Curry's version of Joker was excellent. What happened was, at the time when the Joker was being introduced into the series, a new producer, in addition to Bruce Timm, was brought in on the series for a couple of different reasons, and I'm not even privy to all those reasons, but he did not care for Tim's performance. And so I tried to convince him, and I brought Tim back in and tried to address that producer's notes, and he just was not able to be convinced. And so I had to tell Tim, which was a heartbreaker, and it broke Tim's heart too. And I know that, as far as I believe, Bruce Timm and I are the only two people that actually have any footage at all of an episode that has Tim Curry as the Joker in it. It was never mixed, it was never fully produced, because before the episode was finished, we replaced him. But that was one of those very, very sad things that then turned out to be a very joyous thing, because we did get such a good Joker from Mark Hamill. But again, I would not have replaced Tim in the first place. I personally wouldn't have. And there was also a secondary situation with that, where I had booked Clive Revel as Alfred. And Clive I had known for years and years, again, back at Hanna-Barbera and many other places I had known him from. And booked him. He came in and did, I think, maybe the first 1 or 2 episodes, and then we got a call from his agent saying, "Oh, Clive just accepted," I think it was a touring show of some play, or it was a show on the West End in London, or something that was going to make him unavailable to us for sometimes months at a time. And at the time, this is way back when, we didn't have the technical ability we do now to record people from all over the world.
Right.
To beam it up to a satellite and have it beam back to us wherever we are. So it was not an option. We had to recast. And again, I would not have replaced him if I didn't have to. But again, another joyous thing happened. We had done auditions for that role, for the role of Alfred, and had ultimately decided on Clive Revel. Our second choice was an actor that we couldn't even believe had even auditioned, who was Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. And Ephraim, we knew so well from, certainly FBI,
right,
and such a dapper, handsome, wonderful man. Rest his soul. I used to speak to him every year for the past 10 years. I'd offered him work every once in a while, and he would just say, "Oh, darling, no, I'm very happy here in Solvang, and I'm enjoying my garden." And it was so elegant and so lovely, and he was a wonderful Alfred, and we were so lucky to have him. And I'm glad I'm having the opportunity right now to speak about him, because he's one of those people that, the instant they leave this planet, they are instantly in the arms of God.
Right.
And I'm not a terribly religious person. He was. And because of that, that's why I know so well that he is, if there is a maker, he's right there with him, because this was a good, good man. And it was my honor to know him and to direct him.
Well, it was our pleasure to watch him as Alfred. So, yeah. Personally, what does the character of Batman mean to you?
For me, Batman represents something very different than for most people. He was a jumping off point in my career, and there's a handful of us that can say that, whether we're actors or directors or designers of graphic novels or animation creators. Many of us, that Batman has impacted our lives greatly in that way. I was not of the generation of women, girls at the time, who read action comic books. That wasn't the thing that was done. This would have been somewhere around the early 1960s when if we did read comic books, which we weren't allowed to in my household, that's the years I would have done it. It just wasn't commonly done. Now, of course, everybody reads comic books. Everybody reads graphic novels. It's surprising to find out who is intimately aware of what the full story of a certain graphic novel is after we've adapted it to make it into a piece that we can make a 70-minute movie out of. But for me, Batman is my favorite superhero, not that you asked that specifically. But I like him because he's human. He can make mistakes. there's this kind of wonderful story that I knew nothing about the fact that he, I knew that he and Talia had a thing, but the fact that Talia at some point slipped him a Mickey and they had sex and she had a child by him.
Right.
And unlike many people in general who might just go, this is not my responsibility, this is forever ago, I knew nothing about this.
Right.
He takes on the responsibility of raising this boy, not just financially, but teaching him what is right and wrong. There's a lot of humanity involved in that, and that really appeals to me in Batman. So he appealed to me on a very emotional level. He appealed to me on a professional level, and I've met some of my dearest friends because of Batman. How many people can say that?
Yeah. Well, I've been meeting some incredible people because of Batman too, yourself included. Speaking of Son of Batman, I just interviewed Bruce Thomas, and he wanted me to remind you that he has played Batman before. And
I know it very well.
Yes, and he's
well, I will not forget that. He's a terrific actor. My goodness, I'm so glad I found him.
Yes.
From like true finds where, if you look at like the last maybe 3 or 4 years, every third or fourth project I'm working on, he's a part of. Because he's just so versatile and so good, and everybody goes, wow, where did he come from? Like he sprang up out of nowhere. But this is a working actor for a long time, and thank you for saying nice words about him, because I think he's great too.
So to wrap things up, I just really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the hours of entertainment and joy that you've given me, and for being such an incredible, amazing steward of Batman over the years. And you've helped influence and shape the path of not just Batman, but animation at large. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that.
Is it any wonder why everybody likes her so much? What an incredible career and an incredible lady. I was so pleased to have the opportunity to meet her and interview her. My thanks again to Andrea Romano. You can and should also check out voice actor Rob Paulson's website, robpaulsonlive.com, where you can listen to the podcasts of the event honoring Gordon Hunt that Andrea and I spoke of earlier. And he has a ton of great other podcast interviews with amazing people from the field of animation. His podcast is called Talkin' Tunes, which he actually records every few months at the Hollywood Improv. So by all means, if you are in LA and can catch a show, catch it, because it is always a good time. And you can also follow him on Twitter at Yakko Pinky, as he was the voice of Yakko on the Animaniacs and Pinky on Pinky and the Brain. So that's Yakko Pinky, YAKKOPINKY on Twitter. He's an amazing voice talent and a wonderful guy as well. Check him out. That's it for this episode. Stay tuned for the next episode. We'll feature 1966 Batboat designer Mel Whitley coming up real soon. We've also got, finally, Michael Keaton's stunt double in Batman and Batman Returns, Mr. Dave Lee. Worth the wait, I promise. I'm Pat the Batman Fan. You can follow me on Twitter at Pat the Batman Fan. Don't forget to like the Bat Podcast on Facebook, facebook.com/BatPodcast. As always, my awesome theme song is The Guardian by Whitewall. I'll see you on the next episode. Until then, I'm Pat the Batman Fan, and this is the Bat Podcast, live from Gotham City.